Well, hello, everyone. This is Mike Berg here from Panduit. I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar today. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm a part of the enterprise group for Panduit, and I focus on industrial network infrastructures across smart building, warehouse automation, and manufacturing. I've been in the industry for 34 years across product management and business development around controls and in networking. I'd like to also introduce Adrian Rayola from Rockwell Automation, who will talk to us now and do a little intro for us as well. So Adrian, over to you.
Thanks, Mike, for that. Yeah, Adrian from Rockwell Automation, coming to you from our Hawthorne Customer Experience Centre in Melbourne, Australia, which is a fantastic new facility that we've just introduced. I'm just going to give you a very quick tour around the facility, show you some of the technology we have on display, including many of our cybersecurity solutions that I'll reference later on. So if you are in Melbourne, in Australia, I welcome you to come in and visit us at the Customer Experience Centre, which is really state of the art. So my role at Rockwell is application consultant with our network and cybersecurity services team. So effectively, I do the pre-sales technical consulting on all of the various network and security solutions we have. So that's a brief version of me, and from that we'll continue. Mike, I'll hand it back to you.
All right. Well, thanks, Adrian, and welcome everyone to our webinar, Tips for Building a Secure Network Infrastructure. So just to run through the agenda for you all, what we're going to talk about today is kind of the current market state, the challenges for manufacturers across both systems planning and physical deployments. We're going to refresh you on what the threats are that we need to consider both externally and internally. We're going to talk about how to defend yourself and your plant, understanding IT and OT or operations convergence, and creating a defense in depth strategy. Next, we'll go into threats that are specific to the plant floor. We'll cover compliances and standards, and we'll address where to start, discussing methods, architectures, and assessment strategies to review your spaces. So with that, Adrian, I'm going to turn it back to you for a second.
Yeah, so we've teamed up today because we believe that Rockwell and Panduit's got the best-in-class experience and knowledge about cybersecurity and security in general in the operations space. So, for example, with Rockwell's team, some of our differentiators is that we have people that know and understand what happens on the plant floor in process and with various industrial environments. With our delivery team of network engineers. As well as backed up by our global team. So we have a global network, both network cybersecurity services, as well as managed support for maintenance, management and monitoring some of the solutions we're going to talk about a little bit later. Thanks, Mike.
And from the Panduit side, as the arrow's pointing to there, we're very focused on the physical networking architecture. So if you're not familiar, who is Panduit? We are the only end-to-end network and electrical infrastructure solution provider that understands the requirements of today's advanced global enterprise and manufacturing. From the data center and office to the plant floor and production line, we provide complete solutions optimized to work together so you get the most out of your infrastructure investment. Panduit's collaborated with Rockwell for more than 15 years, addressing the needs of Ethernet on the plant floor, starting from environmental factors such as mechanical ingress, climate and chemical and EMI noise, to being a contributor today on converged plant-wide Ethernet and giving you the guidance to help ensure your physical deployment matches that logical planning that we'll be talking about, and providing a secure and reliable performance to your plant for many years. So let's talk a little bit in our first section about the network and security challenges for industrial networks. So just a reminder for everyone that it's a new day, right? We're in Industry 4.0 right now, right? So the industry is really evolving around us, and it's with amazing speed, even for industrial, right? It's taken some time, but things are really moving with smart manufacturing. Automation has brought us so many benefits in productivity, business agility, innovation to make products more feasible to bring to market. And now we're moving into this more connected world where we're considering things like the cyber physical systems, where automation is more adaptable now to context and changing conditions, and where we're leveraging the Internet of Things, where connected devices can help us monitor and be more productive and leverage wired and wireless networks to communicate across the facility and back through the enterprise as well. A surprising stat that's out there is that per capita GDP can be accelerated by as many as 10 times by fourth industrial revolution tech advancements. That's something to really consider with these days and what's going on in the world. All right. So how many of you have seen some pictures like this? I think it happens either over time or it's just something that we're real familiar with, right? Our design plans sometimes they change over time, or sometimes they don't turn into a good implementation plan. So unfortunately, these look familiar to a lot of us, right? And as Ethernet emerged onto the plant floor, where did it start? It started at the machine level, right, with a few connections, and those connections grew and grew. And a lot of the planning for IP networks and the design of the infrastructure was not thought to be as important, or we just didn't recognize it at that time. And now we're trying to go back and modernize those networks. But over time, we've also learned from the struggles, we've learned from the pitfalls. We know how to plan for these networks so much more effectively and how to deploy them from the top down and the bottom up so they're scalable, they perform, and you can maintain them and keep them secure. So right now, let's take a look at the role of IT and OT, or operations, in the evolution of industry.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So if you're not familiar with the term OT, it's the accepted term now to refer to operations technology, essentially IT for the plant floor or for the industrial environment. One of the things, if you look at the cybersecurity standards and certifications, you'll see in those embedded, one of the first things you'll learn if you take on a cybersecurity course is the different requirements of the two environments. There's an acronym called CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. In the IT world, the C is the top. Confidentiality is king, and availability or the resiliency of the network is at the bottom. In the OT environment, that's flipped around. It's AIC. Availability is king. Uptime. We need to stay in production. And then there's integrity, of course. We don't want our valuable recipes and production process values being monitored. And then there's a confidentiality. So there's some of the just brief example of some of the different requirements. And so the key is that we don't want to see for the best intentions, the right IT-led kind of principles being put into the OT environment and vice versa. We want to make sure that we understand the requirements of each environment and make them work together, but also look at the differences in the way that the OT networks have evolved. And we'll touch on that a little bit more a little bit later.
So being forward-looking, these are 3 trends amongst the top 10 that relate to more the physical infrastructure and architecture. And they're ones that you might be involved with today or you're considering for the future. And so these include distributed architecture. So there's increased usage of cloud and edge computing across plant floors and manufacturing spaces. Applications are happening with both today, right? And we're seeing more cloud, but we're also seeing just as much edge compute. And so seamless communications from the edge devices and easier deployment with PoE devices is feeding the trend. And then new technologies that will help connect edge devices like single pair Ethernet or Ethernet APL are starting to roll out, and those are going to enhance communication to the sensor level. So McKinsey reports that 75% of enterprise generated data will be processed by edge or cloud computing by 2025. Amazing statistic there. So future connectivity. So we're all monitoring, usage of Wi-Fi and also 5G and trying to leverage 5G where we can, right? So up to 80% of the population is going to be reached by 5G by 2030. You see a lot of that deployment going on around the world right now. So these technologies can benefit areas like predictive maintenance and process analysis today, but they can play a stronger role in infrastructure in the future. So definitely something we want to pay attention to. And then the last one, directly to our point today, around trust architecture, right? So defense in depth strategies around cybersecurity are a best practice today. We'll discuss a lot of that today. And then zero trust security and blockchain technologies, they provide for more secure communications to lower the risk of breaches, reduce the cost of complying with security regulations and capital expenditures. So about 10% of global GDP is associated with blockchain by 2027, according to McKinsey. And obviously, it's a hot topic. So here's some other things to consider from a more technical standpoint as well. So if you're building switch panels and control panels and directing your specification, there's a real transformation going on inside those panels and cabinets. It's changing design strategies, and you're changing them based on the increase in Ethernet connected devices. Some of those things include space optimization and organization in that panel, planning for what types of network devices and power devices and where you're going to place them, maximizing space within the cabinet for a better design as well. You're also concerned about things like noise mitigation. So EMI and EMC noise, mitigating it by various means with grounding and bonding, shields, shielding devices, other mitigating ways to do that as well. And then planning for the right device cabling. What's best suited for performance and reliability, and making sure that we meet the control standards, electrical standards, and safety regulations. And then how will this machine connect to the wider plant network with reliability and minimum commissioning time? So addressing safety and access to personnel who may need to get into that panel, but will also be near hazardous voltage, something we also need to consider. And then security, securing those ports, devices, and equipment physically with a good design practice. All righty, so now we'll talk about security challenges for industrial networks.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. This picture kind of expands a little bit on what I was saying, a couple of slides earlier about unique challenges for operations, for OT or for industrial networks. You look at the diagram on the right, and you notice one thing about that network is all the green lines is that this is a modern kind of industrial Ethernet network where we've migrated everything to Ethernet. And there's no obvious natural segmentation or boundaries or zones or conduits of containment, which are mandated by our security requirements these days. So there's a whole range of challenges we have to address in the OT environment, and that being one of them. And Mike just gave you the perfect example a couple of slides ago of the cabinet with all of the cables, and we've all seen a panel where we've had an unmanaged switch tacked on to add a few more ports. And the issue here is that the cyber threat, or in the cyber world, industrial networks are becoming ever increasingly the target, either directly, deliberately, or inadvertently, because we have so many open holes in our network, whether it's a loose unmanaged switch hanging off a cabinet somebody plugs into, puts a malware on the network, or just lack of segmentation, boundaries, and perimeter hardening. So as I said, you can see on this slide here some of the challenges we face, and again, we'll touch on a couple more of those as we go along. So we're going to now look a little bit more detail about some of the threats and trends in manufacturing, just to expand on what I was saying there. You'll see on this side the trend over the recent years. If you go to the newspapers and the headlines in the last 2 or 3 years, there are just as many industrial attacks as there are corporate world attacks that you'll see in the headlines. And it's for that same reason I said, is that operations networks, and by nature, because we're dealing with legacy networks that have been migrated over the years, the visibility from the corporate side is poor. All the various reasons, these networks are just far more vulnerable now than an IT network, which typically now are quite well locked down. In the IT world, we've been addressing cybersecurity now. It's quite well practiced and understood. Whereas the OT environment is still not very well understood. And that's why you're seeing all of these types of attacks coming into the headlines in recent years. And so where are those attacks coming from? If we look at our the map of our network, let's look at threat vectors. Now, I mentioned that earlier, that the CIA AIC difference between IT and OT. Another common misperception in the OT world is, we just need a firewall. We've got a firewall, therefore we're protected from the outside-in attack. The mindset tends to be, the hackers are trying to hit us. We put a firewall in, they're not going to get into our private network. But that's only one of the ways that an attack can get into the network. There are just as commonly the headline news that we see and the attacks that we see in the papers and whatnot are actually coming from other directions. And so, Mike, do you want to expand on that with some of the insider threats?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about the external. Let's talk about the internal threats as well. So the insider threats are also real, right? They could be your employees or former employees, your contractors, or your business associates, right? And unfortunately, and not even that they're all intentional either, right? So more than half of those surveyed think that detecting and preventing insider threats are more difficult than the external cyber attacks, and about 38% believe that they're about as difficult. So internal is just as hard, if not harder, than the external threats that you're facing. So consider what Adrian just discussed on the last slide, and also now think back to those photos I showed you earlier. Were those applications locked down? It's something we have to consider when we're upgrading our design. And so we'll talk more about that defense in depth strategy and best practices now.
Yeah, so let's give you some of the actual, practical things that we can look and do for managing security on the plant floor. And the good news is today, in this present day, we have a lot more tools, solutions, products, services up our sleeve in our kit that we can address and start layering our defense. So this is the good old onion model. Some of you may have seen before. Defense in depth strategy, and it still makes a lot of sense to have the more layers of security, the better. We can talk about one specific product feature or that people hear about and think that's all you need. No, we don't. We need multiple layers, and of course today we're going to focus on that physical layer, and Mike's going to expand on that in a little bit. Just as important as all the other layers there, which I'll touch on as well. So our defense in depth strategy model is really important. And that ties in directly with some of the cybersecurity standards that Rockwell and Panduit are aligning with. The NIST framework is one that you'll see in other cybersecurity presentations that we have, and the 62443 standard that I'll reference a couple of times. So as I said, the more layers of protection, the better protected we are. There is no such thing as 100.0% cyber secure. The best we can do is to add to the defense in depth. So, Mike, do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the further physical aspects of defense in depth?
Yep, absolutely. So in those outer layers of the onion, right, is where the physical becomes important. So I'm going to go through some of the elements of the physical side so you've got a better understanding of them. I mentioned earlier that Panduit had a role in collaborating on the CPWE architecture. A big part of what we're doing is trying to align the right infrastructure pieces, what we call building blocks, to each level of the plant floor. So from the cell area zone to the industrial zone, industrial computing, and even into the enterprise as well. These are IT and OT ready solutions we both collaborate on. We meet the information communications technology standards. We ensure testing, reliability, and scalability of the physical network as your logical network need grows. And there's also a physical CPWE guide that we'll share at the end as well. So let me show you a few of those solutions as well. So I mentioned zone cabling there, or zone solutions. This is showing actually a physical design for segmentation. So we talk about logical segmentation and VLANs, but it's also important to be able to physically segment the network as well. And so this helps us, right? Versus a flat network design, it helps us improve performance, uptime, but it's also more resilient if a security threat occurs. So segmentation relates to converting from that centralized cabling approach, as we're showing in the blue there, to a zone topology. And in a centralized cabling model, that's where you have your home runs back to your control room, as we're showing. And then in the zone cabling model, more of the red color there, the zone cabling nodes are actually cabled back to a zone enclosure or a cabinet. And that actually reduces the amount of cabling required in the application, but also provides each cell area to operate independently, right? And that helps localize those threats and have less of an impact when an event happens. That also helps us from that performance and resiliency factor as well. So very important to the architecture. That speaks to the architecture, providing that performance as well as security. So this just gives you a quick look at what some of these building block solutions look like. So we have a couple of them here, for deploying more of the IT equipment in a 19-inch rack mount configuration. You've got the IDF. We call it an industrial IDF because it is IP rated. And then you have kind of a hybrid enclosure there that's both control panel and network focused, and that's called a network zone system. And that's more at your access layer of the network. So just a couple of solutions that you can consistently deploy across the network. They're predictable and they're easy to deploy, but they provide that testing and reliability that I mentioned earlier, that's very beneficial in the long term to be able to baseline that network and test it as well. So from a security aspect as well, I mean, obviously you can have locks on your enclosures, but you can also have intelligent access control. So something as simple as adding an intelligent PDU to this cabinet provides the capability to also add a handle, right, that can work off of Bluetooth or even with the building control system, so that that cabinet works just like your door access control would work. Because many of these cabinets are in an open space, and we need to be able to lock them down. And sometimes we want to know who's in and out of these enclosures as well. The other advantage to the intelligent PDU is that you also have some capability to monitor power as well as some of the conditions going on as well. So the temperature and humidity level. So just kind of that modern technology that you're starting to see come into smart manufacturing. And so if we take that to the next level, we can also provide that enclosure access control, but bring both safe and secure access to the control panel. So in 2017, Panduit introduced a solution called VeriSafe. That's the yellow device that you see there. And that was the first absence of voltage detector. The device is, in effect, it's a tester permanently installed to the power leads in the enclosure with a low voltage connection through the door. So the device, when it's activated, and it tests whether it's installed and operating correctly, it tests for phase connections and lack of voltage, and then it provides that green signal saying it's safe to open the door in terms of arc flash safety. So the latest 2.0 version of this solution includes a network module and interface, so you can remotely monitor these panels. And they can also be teamed with an electronic interlock. So actually that green light activates the electronic interlock as well. So that combines both the access control, safety, and ensuring the proper personnel are going into these high voltage control panels. All right, and so then one of the last elements I want to show you here is one of the simplest ones. So these simple items, they're called lock-ins and blockouts. They improve your physical security by adding physical port security on top of your electronic lockdown. So they act as a deterrent to the insider threats, and they prevent people from changing things unintentionally as well. So these are available for RJ45, LC fiber, USB connections as well, very common things on devices. We can block them out, and we can also lock in our cords that are already there so people can't move them around.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, like, so as I was saying earlier, you'd be surprised at the number of attacks that we're seeing in the OT industry. There's much being caused by an inadvertent or deliberate inside threat where somebody's seeing an open port on a switch, getting access to a cabinet. They just want to plug in their laptop, access their emails, and they inadvertently put a malware on the network, and it goes and starts doing it damage. And so that's why we can't stress enough how important the physical layer is. Mike also referenced a thing called CPWE. If you haven't already seen it, this is it here. This is the reference architecture that we refer back to that shows that our layers of manufacturing, according to the Purdue model, our zoning and segmentation, which is basically mandated in the current cybersecurity standards like 62443, you'll see it referenced in there. So it's not just a nice to have or a should have, it's essentially a must have to meet your cybersecurity requirements to have this sort of a segmentation and zoning. So we look at hardening the perimeter and the boundaries and whatnot. But we also then, if we look at more closely at the Purdue model, we'll see that the industrial demilitarized zone is something that we do talk about a lot, because at the end of the day, even if we do get an attack on the inside of the network, it has to find its way back out to the internet to dial home and start allowing the hackers and whatnot to cause trouble. So one of the key tenets is that we have an IDMZ, as we call it, which essentially the mandate is no direct traffic between the operations world or the production world and the enterprise and internet. We do all of our communication through a buffer network, the demilitarized zone, where we use jump boxes and whatnot to communicate. So that's one of the key principles. And then in these next few slides, I'm just going to talk about some of the other key technologies and tools that we have and things that are really essentially a must-have in our operations environment. So endpoint protection, essentially what we used to call antivirus, we now call endpoint protection and detection, or next generation antivirus. Rockwell is partnering with CrowdStrike in that space, so we're now one of the leaders in endpoint protection. And the philosophy and technology now is different. In the old days, we used to have our signatures and look for viruses and malwares. Now we use AI to intelligently look at all the various kinds of threats and attacks that can happen in the network, not just your traditional viruses and whatnot, but also unusual behaviors and anomalies, people that are getting access to the system. So the whole Rockwell platform, the Factory Talk suite, as we call it, is now actually validated against CrowdStrike, and we are a certified CrowdStrike partner to deliver that solution for the OT environment. Then we look at authentication, authorization, AAA as the security people refer to it. How do we gain access to a network through our engineering workstation or laptop or PC? And there are a variety of technologies and solutions we can put in there. The Rockwell Factory Talk layer has a built-in security layer called Factory Talk Security. So it's essentially our version of the Windows group policy, where we can take our Active Directory accounts and then apply policy to say who's allowed to access what Rockwell software from where, and even right down to embedding into the PLC a security ID that only allows people with valid access to the system to do that. There's other technology in this space which I can elaborate on at another time. We look at software-defined access to do the same sort of authentication, authorization at the network layer with the devices that we connect. And in fact, we're doing that right now with a technology called CIP Security. So if we look at that, this is actually doing authentication, integrity checking, and confidentiality or encryption natively within the products. So you can now have an encrypted conversation between two Ethernet IP devices, such as, for example, a Rockwell controller and the SCADA layer, or between two controllers sharing critical values. And all of that authentication, authorization, and encryption is done with very minimal IT knowledge required. It's all a very simple process to set up. All of the certificate exchanging and packet hashing and all of that is done within the product. So this is one of the great layers of the onion we have now, is to apply CIP security for perhaps a critical area or an area of the plant that requires a higher security level. If you look at some of the recent well-known, well-publicized industrial espionage attacks, one of the key things the hackers do is to try and delete all of the files, all of the intellectual property of the system, and that's how they ask for their ransoms, is to delete all the backups. So asset management and recovery, having good backups, knowing what's connected to the network, you can't protect what you don't know about, is critical. And again, we've got a variety of solutions for asset inventory. In fact, when I very quickly showed the camera spinning around the room here in the Melbourne Customer Experience Centre, we actually had on the main screen our asset inventory solution, which combines our asset inventory, our backup and recovery, our product lifecycle, along with patch management, which we'll look at. Patch management is very important, where every system needs to be patched and qualified. Rockwell maintains the database of validating all of the various patches that gets released by Microsoft and others. So this is a look at it here. As does the Factory Talk system. People come to me and always ask, Adrian, what should I do? What's the cybersecurity recommendation for patching? And if you go into the cybersecurity standards, they won't tell you how often or when or why you should patch. They'll just tell you that you do need a patch management program. And that's something that we can help recommend for a control system, because of course, we don't just want to be turning on automatic Windows updates, because although we might be patching the system, we might also be breaking things. And so there's a balance there with patch management to keep that, balance the needs of uptime, availability versus the needs of integrity that we talked about earlier. And so that is something that Rockwell can assist with. The next one, and this is probably the hottest topic in the world of cyber detection and protection, is a thing called threat detection. So we talked earlier about our endpoint protection, which looks after the Windows machines, or Linux or Mac, in the form of CrowdStrike and other solutions like that. Threat detection is doing the similar sort of intelligence, looking at threats, anomalies, alerts of all kind, but it's doing it at a layer up. It's doing it at the network level. So it's actually doing it by monitoring the network traffic that flows in and around our OT and IT network, and intelligently analyzing the network traffic and alerting the cyber security ops team, or security ops center, or SOC if you like, on threats and anomalies. And that is something that we've got set up here in the CEC, that if you're interested to looking at that in more detail, we've got all of the major threat detection solutions available. We partner with all the major ones that work in the OT space. That's something I've been personally very actively involved in. And a companion with that is good secure remote access. There are various solutions out there. Again, we partner with some of the ones that are best designed for the operations environment. So we're not just using a traditional VPN and a remote desktop session to access our workstations from home or from the airport. We're using much more hardened and strengthened and secure methods, things like reverse tunneling, so that from the outside we only give very specific limited access to a contractor or a machine builder or a supplier, to only the specific piece of equipment that they need. And so there's some really good solutions available now for design for OT for remote access, what I call sort of net bank strength security. So that's just a quick look at some of the tools and technologies we have. We can, as I said, if you're interested, we'll contact us later and we can do a deeper dive on those. And we just want to finish off here now with giving you guys a bit of an idea of how Rockwell and Panduit can assist with this with some of our services, because it is quite a complex area. So there are various services that we can offer to help address cybersecurity, in the form of things like risk assessments, penetration testing, and even just having a good cybersecurity management system, which is something that, if you look into those cyber standards I mentioned earlier, like 443, that's actually the first most important thing, is to just have a good cybersecurity program, and we can help, and the standards can help you define what that is. But we also, the bread and butter of applying cybersecurity is, if you don't know where you stand today, if you don't know the state of your plant, then the place to start is with an assessment of some kind. So I'll hand back to Mike just to talk about some of the assessment and design offerings that we do.
Yep, I'll let you get a drink of water there. So there's been a lot of information over the last 35 minutes here as we've been talking to you. If you're wondering where your network stands, or maybe even where you might start to look, this is a peek at the standard network assessment available through Rockwell Automation and your authorized service providers. This service provides the documentation of the major network components. It's a baseline of the physical, logical, and security-based elements to the industry standards. From the Panduit perspective, it's got an expanded review of the physical network to the ICT standards, what IT folks will look for, basically, and that's been jointly created by both Panduit and Rockwell. So this is an IT review as well as an OT review. And this service operates with minimal disruption to the production environment, and it includes a program report with your recommendations and remediation plan. So we'll have this flyer, I think, available for you shortly after the webinar as well. The area where this would lead to as well, as we were talking about the physical solutions along the way here, in order to comply with the industry standards, as well as have good best practice, right, in terms of the architecture, you might need some help in creating that overall design, right? And so this is another area where both Rockwell Automation and Panduit have been collaborating. So Panduit helps provide that physical design that kind of matches up with the logical design and is something that can be deployed and is reliable over time as well, and meets all of the what we've promised here in this webinar today. So why you would use this, it is that standards compliance, it is that reliable solution you're going to have, but the design itself helps spell out all the factors that are needed to build out these systems effectively, considering all those industry standards, but as well as like telecom grounding and bonding, right? Avoiding those noise factors, EMC and EMI noise, providing the right information for the contractor who will be putting the system in as well. So the trunk cabling, the cable schedule, exactly how that should all go into place is spelled out in one of these designs as well. Where those different zone boxes are going to go so that you have a completely balanced system, but you also have that physical network segmentation as well, and done to the best IT standard as well. So the cross connects, patch cords, system routing, all using modern IT standards, wire labels, and identification as well. So it's a good path to go down from the assessment into that design service, kind of a turnkey, in order to be able to have that physical design that complements the logical network design.
Yes, and so, like I was saying earlier, you're having good, well, not good network design, having a network design, both physical and logical, that adheres to the reference architectures that we talked about earlier, and now also the cybersecurity standards that essentially mandate having this. So if you have a physical and logical network design, which, as Mike mentioned, Rockwell and Panduit delivers together as a joint service, will ensure that you meet that requirement of the cybersecurity standards. We get a lot of customers now coming to us and saying, Adrian, we need your help with cybersecurity because we can't get cyber insurance for our production organization, literally. And the cyber insurance companies, what they need to see is that you are showing, good compliance with recognized industry standard and standardized design principles. And so, we have a team between Rockwell and Panduit that is set up to help assist you with that. So that's just, a little bit of a snapshot of some of the services there from the guys that know the OT environment intimately well. So that's pretty much the main points we wanted to cover today. So Mike said, a little bit of information to take in, but after you've had to digest, feel free to. I think we're going to open it up for some questions shortly, or if you have a question later, of course, you can feel free to reach out to us. So, appreciate your time. As I said, just one more mention that if you are in Melbourne, please come and see myself or our team at the Melbourne Customer Experience Centre. Or if anywhere else you are in Australia, New Zealand, or around the region, we've got similar services in other locations as well. So just reach out to your nearest Rockwell contact. And yeah, I'll hand it back to Mike for a few final words.
Yes, thank you all for attending today's session, and please stick around. We're gonna see if we have any questions from the session as well. So thanks everyone for your time today, and we'll move it on to Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Adrian, as well. Thank you very much for that information. We have a few polling questions to organize now. So I'm assuming you can see those polling questions at the moment. If you don't see those polling questions, please let us know in the chat box. There you go, they're on the screen. So if you can quickly answer those questions, and we'll go to the next one. Has your company experienced a cyber attack or network security issue? And just please select one of those answers. And the second question we have for you is, which of these defense mechanisms would have the greatest impact on improving your organization's OT cybersecurity posture? Again, if you can just check one of those 5 answers. So our next question is live Q&A. So we have Mike from the US and Adrian from Melbourne online to answer any questions. One of the questions we can answer is, the first one is, what type of things are typically included when assessing the physical network infrastructure? So Mike, I will leave that question to you, if you can answer, please.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Absolutely. So the types of things that are included assessing the physical network infrastructure, that evaluation would include areas such as the enclosures, evaluating how things are distributed within those enclosures. It's kind of an observational review, but it is a walkthrough of the facility. But also the cable and the media selection in the environment, the cable management, the pathways and routing, grounding and bonding, and comparing each of those areas to the ICT standards, the safety standards, and best practice as well for deployment.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that, Mike. I believe there's a question that might be forwarded to Adrian. So I'll ask Adrian of this. Why do I need both a threat detection and endpoint detection antivirus solution?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Yeah, so as I was saying earlier, it's about layers of defense. The more layers we have, the better protected we are. But to answer that question, endpoint detection, as the name implies, protects the endpoint. So that's typically the Windows machine, or it could be Linux or Mac or other operating systems, where we have a physical computer that we need to protect. And that is, as I said, in the past, that was your traditional antivirus. We're now moving to solutions like a CrowdStrike or similar type of AI-based endpoint protection. And then the threat detection, the key difference there is that that's monitoring at the network layer. So again, it works by sniffing the network traffic. So they operate at 2 different levels. One operates essentially on the computer, the other operates by monitoring the network traffic, and they actually do talk to each other. So there's actually communication between these solutions to share the information that they're gathering. Say, hey, I've picked up a threat here on the endpoint. What are you seeing at the network level? And so the solutions actually have integrations together with each other to share that information, and also in turn with the firewalls that are typically installed are protecting the demilitarized zone. So the answer is the more layers the better, and important to have both.
Excellent, thank you for that, Adrian. Actually, I believe I have one more question for you, and also surrounds, of course, OT networks. How is the OT network monitored by cyber ops teams and cloud-based cyber platforms that are now common if there is no direct connection from cloud internet to OT?
Yeah, that's a good pickup. And before I answer that, I also just wanted to make a point on that final poll question where we gave you the checkboxes of what's the most important protection solution. Going on with what I said, of course, we didn't put all of the above option, but naturally, you know, I would suggest that all of those options do have importance. But so just on that poll question, interesting one. But to answer this question, yeah, so there's a key tenet, as I said, in the cybersecurity standards, in our reference architectures, there is a key tenet of no direct communication between the OT environment or the production network and either the corporate network and in turn the internet. So, but in having said that, a lot of the solutions are moving to a partially cloud-based platform, including the cyber ops management. CrowdStrike is actually cloud-based. A lot of the diagnosis and dashboarding and management is done through the Falcon dashboard platform, which resides in the cloud. So how do we get data to and from each end without a direct connection? It's all done through that demilitarized zone network. So in that network, you'll have jump boxes, application servers, replicators. With things like CrowdStrike, we actually use either a reverse proxy or some sort of reverse tunnel. So at no point in time is the internal network exposed to the external outside network. You'll have an external facing, you know, point of entry, and then a reverse tunnel is initiated. So the security is assured in that way. And again, I kind of use the analogy of the NetBank strength connection, where you're hitting the server from the outside and it's initiating a connection back to you. So the security is assured by that demilitarized zone and by that reverse proxy or tunneling type of connection. So good question.
I believe there's a related question focusing on mobile phones from Neville Green. And the question for you, Adrian, is does Rockwell offer hardware solutions for incoming threats over mobile phones such as 3G or 4G networks into PLC controllers?
Oh, that's also an excellent question, and that's a bit of a touching point. So when you say mobile phones, I'm gonna assume you mean something like a 4G modem that's on a machine or something like that. You know, if you're talking about mobile phone as in voice coverage, typically that'd be handled on the IT side of the network. But I'm going to assume you mean, well, certainly what we do see a lot of is machine builders, OEMs, putting machines in plant and say, I need to have a 4G connection so I can remotely manage it and provide updates from, you know, Germany or wherever the machine comes from. Now, from a cyber point of view, they're not recommended. You know, any kind of backdoor entry into the production network via a 3G, 4G connection, 5G nowadays is not considered from a cyber perspective good practice, because it's an open door. It's a backdoor into the network that potentially, if we don't know how secure that is, somebody could get in. So there's two parts to that. The answers to that. If they absolutely insist they must have a 4G connection into the network, there is a solution. What we would do, we don't, as in Rockwell doesn't have a product as in like a 3G modem. What we can provide is something like a zone firewall. So this is a local firewall that sits on the point of connection from the third party machine into the rest of the network. And that way, at least we could manage and control the flow of traffic. Rockwell did have a product called the Stratix 5950 zone firewalls based off a similar Cisco product. It's actually coming towards the end of the life. We've actually announced a partnership with Fortinet. They have a range of zone firewalls that can serve that purpose of protecting any kind of entry to the production network that's not coming in through the front door. And the front door is that demilitarized zone. So from my previous answer, the way we would recommend all external communications, whether it's a third party, machine vendor, mobile phone connection, is to come in through the front door, through the demilitarized zone. And for that, we, as I mentioned earlier in the session, there is an excellent solution called Secure Remote Access by Clarity, which is a Rockwell partner. There's other similar solutions out there, and that is the best. Well, that is probably the way we would recommend that people access the internal network. So I hope that answers the question. But yeah, that's another one we do get. Yes, a modem. So yeah. So try and avoid using 4G modems if you absolutely have to. Zone firewall. If not, come around and bring them in through the controlled front door access.
Thank you for that, Adrian. I believe we have time for just one more question. We have a question for Mike, and the question is: what are one or two examples of physical network security that are typical to implement?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just touch on ones that are very simple. And these are ones that you could, go away from this presentation and do very easily. And so, just putting locks on those cabinets, even the numerical locks, those are good as a deterrent. And then the second one are those physical lockouts and lock-ins for the ports. Those are actually very popular and very simple to implement, very available across the USB, RJ45, LC fiber. So however your network is distributed, that's one additional security measure that would be simple to implement today while you're putting your plans together.
That is perfect. Thank you for that, Mike. And I believe we've actually come to the end of the webinar. It's been an absolute pleasure having you, Mike and Adrian, on the call. Thank you very much for your time and your effort. And a big thank you as well to the audience and everybody that's joined. Please keep an eye out for an email which has a recording if you need to refer to it. And we'll actually be, we'll be gifting a special prize for one lucky person that actually has answered the polling questions, and that will be announced after as well via email. So thank you again for everybody, and have a great afternoon and a great evening. Thank you.